is. It's not really not that bad of a change. Maybe if I can get my slides to change. Okay, boom. So the first thing I want to talk about, there's kind of three main points that we're going to go through. The first one is just review what has been updated and kind of look at our own code. The second one is we'll review what the review process that state code outlines. That's for the Planning Commission itself. It's not really going to be that, it's not going to be a huge change for you, but it is going to be a big change for staff. And then also talk about the new requirements for the city has to post a checklist and requirements online or make them available to the public. And so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So we'll start with our code and what our current process is. So this is a summary of our process. So if somebody comes in for a subdivision application, by code, they're required to meet with planning staff prior to submitting an application. So pre-application meeting. Then they'll move on to preliminary approval. Currently, the Planning Commission is listed as the approval authority for any preliminary plat. We have a 2-week application deadline. One thing that we do right now is we try to confirm the application is complete, and then planning staff distributes plans, and other staff provide red lines, and then we try to incorporate those into the report. If the Planning Commission approves that, it approves the site plan, it goes on to construction drawings, which are submitted to the city engineer. They will review and provide feedback and red lines, and they go back and forth until they can get to the point where they sign it. Then the final approval for final plat. Currently, the Planning Commission is the approval authority for that as well. Our current chart, our deadlines listed says it's a 2-week deadline. However, by code, it's a 5-day deadline application. And so that is one thing that we'll probably want to look at. And another thing that the code requires is that the construction drawings have to be reviewed and approved. And then after that, we do if the Planning Commission approves the subdivision plat, then they can have a pre-construction meeting, do the recording, and move on with the actual building of the development itself. So this is what our current review process looks like when an application comes in. You can see they have about a 2-week application deadline. The staff takes a day or two to review to make sure it's complete. Then we try to get everything out to the other staff by Thursday. And then the other staff has a couple of days, or the other departments have a few days to review it. Then we compile the reports, and we try to get those out to you Thursday before the meeting, and then you have your chance to review the staff report. So the next couple slides, what we're going to do is go through what the state code says, compare it to our code, and a couple of notes. One thing that I will note is that some of my recommendations are going to be more conservative in the interpretation of the code and lean more towards what the intent of the code was, partly to avoid any future fights or lawsuits with an applicant. And if there's vagueness in the code, typically the applicant has the ability to interpret the code and how it should apply by state code. So we'll go through a couple of these. I have about 8 of these slides of comparisons that really kind of hit on the main points that we'll have to look at. So the first item that the state code does is it creates a bunch of new definitions. So it creates a definition for review cycle, subdivision application, subdivision improvement plan, subdivision ordinance review, and subdivision plan review. Currently, we don't have any of those defined in our code. And so that's one thing we may want to look at is defining what some of those mean. Some of those will go into a little bit more detail about how it is, what those are defined as, because they become a little bit more important as we interpret the state law. But yeah, so those are the first thing. That's kind of one of the differences in the new code. The next one is, so this is an application review period for a preliminary plat. So within state code states that if an applicant requests, or no, sorry, this is pre-application meeting, excuse me. So if an applicant requests a pre-application meeting, the municipality shall, within 15 business days after the request, schedule a meeting to review the concept plan and give initial feedback. Currently, what our code reads is each person who proposes to subdivide land within the city limits shall confer with the planning commission staff before preparing any plat charts, etc. So one of the intents of this code was that it was written in a way that if an applicant wants to meet with staff, then we have to respond. However, the general interpretation by the league and the state legislature is that we can't make a pre-application meeting required. That we has to be available to an applicant, but if they show up with an application, we have to take it, even if they haven't met with us first. The next one is the process for review and approval of a subdivision. So what this does is it defines who can approve a preliminary plat, and it's an administrative land use authority, which means an individual, board, or commission appointed or employed by a municipality, including municipal staff or municipal planning commission. And then it goes on to say, if a preliminary subdivision application complies with the applicable municipal ordinance and the requirements of that section, the administrative land use authority shall approve the preliminary subdivision application. Also within this code, it specifically states that the city council is not the approval, cannot be part of the administrative land use authority. And so currently, the planning commission, as by code, states that following a review of the preliminary plan, the planning commission shall act on the plan as submitted or modified. So essentially, we're in compliance. The state wanted to get the city council, who's a more political body, out of approving administrative items. And so this section of code we comply with right now. And we'll talk a little bit more about that tonight when we talk about the amended subdivision plat section. A few of you emailed me about that, and so we'll go over that a little bit in more detail as well.
Back to the previous chart, I'm sorry.
Yes.
So this chart here, where it says if they request it, we're required to, yeah, there we go. If we request it, the municipality shall within 15 business days schedule the meeting, but it doesn't say it's not required.
Correct.
And so what you're saying is we're taking the position that the city can't require that.
Yes, that would be my recommendation.
Come to that. Is there somebody in the legislature, Amy, where do we?
Yeah, so the Utah League of Cities and Towns has put out, as they've worked with the state legislature to implement this code change, this was their direct recommendation, is that the point of this language was to remove the requirement of a pre-application meeting. And so I will admit, there are some sections, I don't love how many of these sections are written, and I think we could push back if we wanted to.
You just got to go into it with the mentality of that a good part of our legislative body are realtors / land developers / big corporations that have to do with that. And that's how this law was written.
Yep. Yeah, it's essentially the purpose, what stemmed from this law is that several of the members of the legislature and developers across the state felt like cities were taking too long and being too restrictive in our approval process. And so this was really written to hem in what cities could do during the approval process.
I could see the opposite argument in that requiring that we have a pre-meeting, that information is given to the applicant that will speed up the process so that their application isn't rejected the first time it's presented to the planning commission.
Yeah.
Oh, I fully agree. I feel like
This doesn't necessarily speed up the process like I think they want to, because there's nothing that says we have to approve it on the first go round. I think
It slows it down.
in some respects, I think it's convenient that they took the city council out of it, because I think there's a lot of city councils that are opposed to big developments. And so I think that it was carefully crafted to make it to where basically a developer, if it's art, they don't need a rezone, they can pretty much come in and slap some plans down on the city's desk and say, I want this and you have to approve it because the state code says that I can't.
yeah, exactly.
This
I feel
probably
like that
has a
was
bigger
very much
effect.
the intent. Sorry,
I was
Andrew.
going to say this probably has a bigger effect on people that are not bigger developers, because the bigger developers, people that are experiencing this, they know how to read a
100%.
city's, they know how to read a city's code and say, this is what I need, this is what we need to
If it's
provide.
100+ subdivision, it's gonna come to the city well thought out and well planned.
Yeah, if you have Nielsen Homes that comes in with subdivision,
Yeah.
they've done, hundreds of subdivisions and they're gonna have a good idea. But the guy, your neighbor down the street who has 5 acres, he's gonna need a little bit more help
Can-
in the
He's most likely
process.
gonna request a pre.
Yep.
Can-
It was wholeheartedly geared towards that rapid development.
Can we put on the application, like, we strongly recommend
Yeah, that's one thing.
meeting?
In my last
Like-
organization, we removed the requirements for a pre-application meeting, but we did have on the subdivision application that we recommend meeting with staff prior to submittal. And then we had a dedicated time every week that we would just meet with applicants or potential applicants about projects.
No, it's okay. I think it brings up a good point. But
Okay.
So as long as we've paused for questions, I've got another one.
Yeah.
So you've outlined several areas where our West Haven ordinances could be updated.
hmm
So why are we only looking at one little paragraph tonight?
Well, we'll be looking at a few of them.
In,
So,
in
you
our
mean for the
packet, we've
code
only got,
change?
yeah.
So this was a discussion that I had with Amy, who unfortunately couldn't be here tonight. Because I think my initial reaction when we had an issue that came up in the last couple of weeks where the whole process about amended plat process came up. And my thought was, and I'd always been to write or to change our approval process for amended plats when we update the rest of the subdivision code. However, after discussion with Amy, we felt that it was more urgent that section get changed quicker. And then we will likely write a more robust section in the coming months. So that's why the code that's in front of you tonight that we have a public hearing on is coming in prior to the rest. It's essentially after discussions with legal counsel, that's what the recommendation was. And the rest of the ordinance, and one of the thing about this that you'll see is there's several sections of this we can implement without a code change. It could lead to some confusion without updating our code, and there's some sections that clearly are in violation of the code. But that was one that we felt like because of some issues going on that should be addressed quicker or sooner than later.
Okay, that's a very good clarification. Thank you.
Yeah. So moving on, one of the next requirements that we have is that for any application that comes in for a subdivision plat, the city will need to provide a report to the applicant within 15 business days of application. That our code doesn't really specify anything like that. That might not even be something we need to write into the code, but that is a new requirement that we will have to follow. So we have a preliminary plat that was submitted last week, and so we have to have a report to them within 15 days of that actual application.
business days or like,
It's business days, so including Friday was how the state would include it, even though our city offices are closed on Friday. So the next one is the process for subdivision review and approval for final plat. So this is a section that changed, and this is actually where our code doesn't comply with the general interpretation of the state law. And so essentially what it states is the municipality shall review and approve or deny a final subdivision plat, etc. Under subsection B, it says may not require planning commission or city council approval. Currently, our code under 156.040, it specifically states that the subdivider shall submit a final plat with 4 copies thereof to the planning commission, and that the planning commission is the approval authority for that. And so the idea is that that state code was geared to take the approval authority for final plats, make it more administrative, have the city engineer, planner, whoever be the approval authority. I actually, in a couple slides, I have some suggestions on how we should address that, because it could be, some cities have just assigned staff. Some cities have created a separate body that's a hybrid of like planning commissioners and not a quorum of planning commission, but one or two planning commissioners and staff. So there's a couple ideas that I would love to, that we'll talk about. So the next one is,
So sorry, just one clarification. We still approve the preliminary plat.
Correct.
It's just once
Yep.
we have that review and approve, or kind of say go back to the drawing board, just that final issuance is done administratively
correct.
based on that meeting. Okay.
Yep. And there are going to be a couple of things that will come up with that. Because I've worked in a few organizations that have been like that. And there's always a, like, if they make, they come in and engineering, because of engineering problems or obstacles, they have to make changes to the plat. At what point do they have to bring it back to the planning commission? And, so there's a few things that we'll have to address as we go through the code as well. So the next item that I have is for improvement plans. So on the state code, it actually kind of went back and forth. In 2023, it required that improvement plans had to be submitted with preliminary and final. In 24, they changed that so that it could only be approved, or only could be required with preliminary or final. Currently, we just require that that it's part of the final plat requirements that improvement plans are submitted. So our code complies with that statute already. So the next one we'll go through in a little bit more detail in about 2 slides is there's a very detailed review process that we have to take for construction drawings and improvement plans. Currently, our code just states that the engineer will do those reviews and that the plans have to be submitted by a licensed engineer. But our code doesn't specify to the level of detail that state code is requiring us, and we'll look at that here in just a second. So the last one is that a municipality shall maintain a published list of all of our requirements. So if somebody comes in with a pre-application meeting or requests what all of our standards are, we have to provide a list essentially. And what I've seen how other municipalities and counties have done this to meet this requirement is provided like a summarized list or a checklist that references different code points, because you can't really, because if you really wanted to detail everything, you just give them a copy of the code. And so what we likely will do is provide a more simplified version that then lists out and references code sections or development standards that an applicant would have to meet as they move forward. So this is the improvement plan cycle that's listed out in the code. This won't actually have a large impact on what the Planning Commission does, but does have a pretty significant impact on how we review our plans. So I sent this to you so you can read through all of these in more detail, but this is essentially what the process looks like. So improvement drawings as defined by state code are essentially construction drawings. It's any drawings of the improvements that have to take place to the property to make sure that it's a functional development. And then it defines there are review cycles. Essentially what a review cycle is in the code is they submit it to the city reviews it, submits it back, the applicant responds. That's one review cycle. Based on state code, they have 4 times. We can require only up to 4 review cycles. So essentially they submit plans to us. We have to provide an index report of every item that they need to change and then reference the code or standard for why that has to change. And then we have 20 business days to do that review. Then we send it back to the applicant, and then the applicant has to respond to each item on that index, and they also have 20 business days. If they fail to reply within 20 business days, then we get an additional 20 business days after they submit it back to us. And so that was a compromise by the state legislature to ensure, because one of our concerns is that, applicants always tell us that we wear them down, that we slow them down. But really what happens a lot of times is we send back our red lines and we don't hear from them for like 4 months, and they send it to us and they want us to have all these plans reviewed within a week or whatever it might be. So anyway, so there's this review cycle. We can do that up to 4 times. At the end of the 4th time, if it's still not approved, or there's still issues that they haven't addressed. One other thing about the review cycles, if they make significant alterations to their plans, for that section of plan, it resets the review cycle count. And so if their initial plan, something completely doesn't work and they make a big change to it, then once they resubmit it, only that section has a restart. Everything else remains. And so at the end of the 4, or at any time that we feel, we could approve them, approve the drawings, and then it moves on to final approval, or we could deny the drawings. The applicant has the option to appeal our denial, and it goes to an appeal committee made up of 1 engineer that represents the city, 1 engineer that represents the developer, and 1 engineer that represents, or that's neutral. And then they will rule on whether or not the reason for denial or the reason for not approval, whether that was based off a solid standard. So if our engineer and their engineer just can't agree, essentially bring in a third party to arbitrate and make a ruling on it.
So how does that third-party engineer get selected?
So the state code isn't specific, but it says that it needs to be an engineer that both parties agree to.
And
So
who pays for that if it's independent? Whoever said, yeah, I'll do it.
Yeah, so the code states that it is split 50-50 between the city and the developer. The developer, if we do have to provide notices of anything for the meeting or make copies or whatever, that's on the developer, but the time it actually takes is split between the city and the developer itself. Yeah. And so then the appeal could be denied. And then if that's the case, then they would have to go back to preliminary approval. That normally would indicate there's something so insurmountable that they can't overcome that there's going to be significant changes to their project. Or they could just not apply or just let it die, let it die. Or it could be, the appeal could be granted and then it just goes to final at that point. And so the couple main takeaways that I want to just highlight real quick is the approval authority. We can no longer require pre-application meetings. Preliminary plats are approved by an administrative land use authority, which planning commission would be my recommendation. But in all reality, we could appoint another body to do that. Just can't be the city council. And then final plats may not be required by the planning commission or city council approval. And then the process, we kind of just reviewed that, so I won't go through that in detail. So here's kind of my main recommendations. So the first one is to add state definitions into our code as needed, make pre-application meetings are recommended but not required, update our code about land use authority for final plats. My idea, and I have a couple slides that will talk about this here in just a second, is that we create a staff body that we could call the DRC, Development Review Committee. In another organization I work for, we had a committee similar that we called the Joint Utility Committee, JUC, but whatever we want to call it. That would be responsible for signing off on improvement plans and final plats. Then just the review process. We don't necessarily have to incorporate everything that's the code listed into our code. But I do think having some note or some definition in our code with what that looks like and referencing back to state code would be prudent. And then we'd also want to do a few other updates to update our code and coordinate with other improvements. And staff will work on publishing the checklist as required. I've held off a little bit on it because I wanted to have some of these conversations prior. And once again, I have a little note on here that the state law has a few points that I think could be argued against, as you mentioned, the pre-application meeting. My recommendation is generally a more conservative approach, partly because code interpretation falls to the property owner, and we want to avoid any fights if we can avoid it. So unless there's a good reason, to not pick a conservative route, that would generally be my recommendation. Sorry, go ahead.
Just kind of stuck on, how do we know what the intent of that code is and this interpretation that somebody's making that, hey, they intended this. oh, is that person that's making that, oh, they intended this, maybe they really intended that.
Yeah,
All we've
and
got to go by is what's written in black and white.
yeah, and I think
Get ourselves maybe off the path by trying to determine what the intent is.
yeah, I
We
think
know-
that's a
All we know for certain is what's in the black and white.
yeah, and I think that's a really fair point. So essentially, how I've kind of derived that is really what the Utah League of Cities and Towns has recommended that cities do based on their conversations with the state legislature. I mean, obviously, the league they can be a very useful resource, but one of their goals is to make the city's relations with the legislature better. And so they're going to lean more to code interpretations that help in that process. And so there is a little bit of bias from their recommendations. But also, once again, I feel like I said, if we want to stick it to a and we feel like this is something we want to die on or a hill that we're willing to fight about, then I'm all for that. But my recommendation as staff is that we would take a more conservative approach unless the city really feels like some aspect of the code is really important to have in. So we just have a few more minutes, so I'll get through the rest. Sorry, and please interrupt me if I have questions. If you have questions.
Okay, I will. On the last slide, it says create a development review committee.
Yep.
I thought we were told by Amy that we had one.
So yes and no. We have an unofficial DRC. Essentially, we're not codified. It's just me, engineer, fire marshal, but we don't have any actual authority to approve or deny anything as a committee itself. We're just really there to help applicants understand the code and go through that process. And so what I would recommend doing is to codify what the DRC is and what their powers actually are. Yeah, so this would be kind of my recommendation. So that we would codify them. And so it could be what I would probably recommend. My recommendation would be that it would be a staff level, partly because I know all of you are very busy, but so it'd be city engineer, community development director, public works director, potentially the fire marshal. There could be other people that we want to include on that. But there are a couple options. You could potentially propose a hybrid option, which is city staff and a couple members of the planning commission. You could even have it be an appointed committee by the mayor or city manager where they just, pick people, you can just say they have to pick 5 people and so there's a couple different options that we could do. But I would recommend that their role be to provide red lines on preliminary applications. So as an application comes in, DRC will always review it and provide red lines for the Planning Commission review. They would approve final site plans, final subdivision plats, construction drawings, pre-application reviews, and they would hold a weekly meeting. So one of the things that I would recommend, this goes to the first and second item, is if we're updating our code to create this kind of administrative land use hearing or land use body that's more administrative, I would ask the Planning Commission consider we tie our subdivision approval process and site plan approval process to follow the same steps. Many of the application processes and review processes are very similar to each other. And so this would be a little bit outside of the subdivision code. But essentially what it would be is that the Planning Commission would still review preliminary site plans, preliminary plats, conditional use permits, and there's probably a couple other things that I'm forgetting. But then once that is done, then all the construction drawings and final applications would just be approved administratively by the DRC. So that is one of my main recommendations as we move forward. One of the other ones that I'm currently working on is we're going to move to an online application system. This will allow applicants to apply online. But one of the problems that we have right now is that, somebody will come in, bring in a printed version to Robin, then they'll email me a digital copy, and then they email Ed a digital copy of something else, or Amy or whoever it is. And before we know it, we don't really know what the final version is. So providing a portal that they can interact with and provide all their plans and applications in one spot, so we know what's current, and then staff will have every member of staff will have access to that. So we're currently actually working on getting that rolling out. And hopefully in the next couple of months, we'll have it available. And then I would also assign, we're in the process of hiring a city planner, and their job would be to keep track of all these applications, know what goes on what agenda, and to help with that process, to really serve as in the administrative role of keeping everything organized, even if they're not on the DRC or whatever it might be officially. So I just have a couple more slides, and then we can talk a little bit about it. One of the other items I would also recommend is this our current review process. I would actually recommend that we give additional week for reviews, especially if we're trying to get, I think one of the problems that we've been experiencing is a lack of feedback from other departments or districts in applications that come in. I talked to Taylor West Weber Water District 2 weeks ago, and they expressed, I wouldn't say they were not angry or anything, but they indicated to me that they would like to have more time to look at plan sets and reviews of items that come in within their districts, and have more time to provide feedback on those. And I know with engineering, it's kind of the same way. And so adding an additional week to the preliminary review process, it just provides a good 7 days to for the different parties to actually review them and get comments back to planning staff. And it would allow, we would still hit our 15 business day deadline with the extended review period as well. So that's something for consideration. And then this is what I would consider for the application approval process with the DRC. So essentially we'd have a recommended pre-application meeting, then preliminary approval by the Planning Commission. And DRC would provide reviews and recommendations on the application, and then the Planning Commission would make their decision. Then for construction drawings, the DRC would be submitted, and then we'd follow the process as outlined in state code. And the final approval would also fall to the DRC once they met all the conditions within the construction drawings. And then this would be more detailed of the proposed preliminary application process would look like. So once again, optional application meeting, the application would be submitted with a 3-week deadline. The application would be reviewed by planning staff to ensure completeness, not necessarily for compliance. If it is complete, we will submit it to the DRC plus, so the review committee plus fire district, any water or sewer districts that we'd want comments on. And then they'd have 1 week to provide comments back to the planning department. Then the planning department would compile all those red lines and submit that report to the planning commission. So that was a lot. I realized that. And I fully anticipate that this was going to take a few months for us to work through all these details. So I wanted to provide a quick introduction and kind of get your brains going. But right now, I want to know if there's any feedback, any questions about what I've proposed, really so I can get a feel, so I could start maybe bringing back some draft language for the Planning Commission to consider, get into more of the weeds of the proposals themselves.
I think it's a lot of really great work. And I really appreciate the fact that you've tied everything back to the state code. Apparently, you know, from the work you've shown us, is something that is long past due. And it looks like it's really great work. So you anticipate it'll probably take a couple of months to finalize this kind of work?
Yeah, I think a little bit depends on the extent of the Planning Commission that you want to take. So if we wanted to just address subdivision code without venturing into like site plan or really establishing DRC, those type of things, it would be a little bit quicker of a process. However, I think if we're gonna knock open the door, we might as well really explore our options to see what the best avenue is for our review process.
Personally, if we're going to be changing things, I have a preference for comprehensive review and revisions rather than paragraph here and a page there. Because when you do it as a comprehensive project, you can see how everything relates to each other, and you're not constantly going to the citizens or the city council with updates.
Yeah, I would agree. And I feel like sometimes when you do things piecemeal, things are forgotten. It ends with gaps or overlap or conflicting, overlapping sections of code, which is what we'd want to avoid. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Should we, any other questions before we take a break? And my apologies, I flipped to the packet at the top of this thread, because this was on the thread from the January meeting. I'm like, oh, 5:30. Didn't look at the date, looked at the time, so my apologies for missing the first part.
I have one more question. So is there any, as we kind of go through and open this up, because I assume whatever changes we make will go to the city council and then they'll
Mhm.
approve the final kind of rendition. Do you know if there's any considerations that they have that we should consider? I know that, I don't know if that's kosher to,
Yeah.
maybe because there's a reason it goes to us than to them, but if there's anything, you know, to save time essentially in the process and get this done quicker, it might be easier to consider anything else they are hoping to see or
Yeah, that's a really good question. I know the city manager, so the city manager has really recommended that we move through the DRC process. He's a big fan
Yeah.
of that proposal. And I think he's had some preliminary conversations, but he's asked that, because I told him today we're going to be discussing a little bit about this. He's asked that I send the PowerPoint that I send it to the council tomorrow, and to see if there's any comments or initial feedback on the process, to see if there's any red flags that we should be aware of earlier on. And I think that's a good point. I mean, it is, sometimes I feel like it is a little bit difficult as being in the planning commission, because your job is to plan and make the recommendations, and the council has the approval authority. Sometimes you're not always sure exactly what they want.
yeah, and I think that's fine. I think if we can just catch those things, you know, there might be considerations that we don't think of or, you know, don't, it kind of goes over our head to think of as we're focusing on other things. And then we're not opposed to those recommendations. We might not be opposed to those recommendations, but it would just help catch them on the first go around. And I'm sure, I mean, I guess ultimately they could change it once it gets to them too, but
Yeah, very true.
Thank you. Thank you for all your efforts in, that was really, really good. I'll have to flip back to the first few slides that I missed, but
Yeah.
thank you for your efforts.
If there's any questions or any thoughts that come up over the next few weeks, please reach out to me, call me, send me an email. I'm more than happy to meet or talk. So please don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything else that you think of. And my plan is over the next week next week or two to go through and create some draft language and be ready to bring something back for some more discussion with a little bit more detail.
so thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Stephen. Very well done.
Yeah. Thank you.
Take just a 2-minute, minute and a half, 2-minute break. We just stay on the same, do we just stay live online, Robin, or do we have to, we don't I don't know Weber County. We're all, Amy's online? Okay. Are we live? Okay. All right. Let's get things started. Everybody ready? Okay, welcome to our Planning Commission meeting. We're going to go ahead and get started, call our meeting to order. And we are going to start with opening ceremonies, a pledge of allegiance from Commissioner Hepworth and a moment of silence or prayer from Commissioner Lamar.
Please rise and repeat the pledge of allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, thank you for the opportunity we have to serve our community. Please grant us the wisdom and courage to follow the law and represent the interests of all our citizens as we make the decisions and carry out our responsibilities. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. Okay, moving along to agenda item number 3, approve the minutes from our previous meeting on January 22nd. I just wanted to say, it's on tonight's minutes too, where it says regular city council meeting. Do we need to change that to regular planning commission meeting? What's that? You already changed that? Okay, I just see it's on tonight's too, so. Okay, anybody have anything, corrections or changes from the minutes?
I've got a couple. On item number 6 at the, with the motion and the second, I'm still not the vice chairman and I don't want to be.
Careful.
And under number 8, neither is Commissioner Galt. Do
You
you want
speak it
to?
enough times, it happens, Jeff.
Yeah.
That's all I have, Robin.
Okay, with those changes, I'm ready for a motion to approve.
I'd move to approve the minutes with those changes.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Reed and a second was Commissioner Hepburn. To approve the minutes. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. We'll move on to agenda item number 4. Stephen, any actions by city council?
We didn't have anything that went to them in this last meeting.
Okay.
so.
All right, we're just moving along here. Agenda item number 5, discussion and action on preliminary and final site plan approval for Bowser Bath Pet Wash Kiosk located approximately 3775 South, 2700 West, parcel number 0803200012, applicant Vicky and Company et al. Do we have someone here to represent that? I bet, Stephen, go ahead and introduce that, and then we'll see if we have someone to represent.
Yeah.
We're just moving really fast.
Yeah. Agent, just texted me and said the Zoom link didn't work for him,
Oh,
and
okay.
so I'm emailing it.
Oh, perfect.
Separately. Hopefully he'll be on in just a minute.
Stephen, is your mic on?
Nope, now it is.
Okay,
All right, so should we get a few minutes or give him some time to get on before we discuss it, or do you
Let's
feel
say
like it's okay, we can discuss
I
it
can
before?
give an introduction and
Okay.
then I've been in contact with the agent and talked to him a couple times, so he's aware of
Mhm.
all the issues that I will potentially bring up through this report. So this is, the applicant is seeking to do a pet wash kiosk on this property. And so I don't know if any of you have been out there to see the site, but the kiosk is actually already sitting there, but not installed. And so if you see, so that's essentially what it looks like. It's a pretty small structure. It's about 12 by 8. And mostly just internal plumbing with a washing area.
Has it been there for a while?
It has.
Like years or a year or
Probably at
just
least a year.
a year or so? Okay.
I think
Yeah,
it
I
used to
don't
be a
know.
snow cone shack.
I just drove by it the other day before I looked at this and I was like, oh, that's an interesting station. But I thought it was in service, but
Took it out because it was too much work for me.
Mhm.
For blacktop there. At his business. business and he already had that one made, and so he moved into this. I figured this would be an easy.
Can
go.
you have her come to the podium?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
It just isn't picking up on the recording.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
state your name and.
I'm Vicky Hall. I own the business Vicky and Company where I'm trying to put the kiosk where the snow cone stand I had was. And kiosk, I just brought it up and sat it there because they were blacktop in the parking lot at his business. And it was a new one that he'd made and had sitting there.
Okay. Perfect.
Oh, yep, he did. He's online. So I will just go through the report and talk a little bit about some of the items and the recommendations from staff. And then I know the applicant has expressed some willingness and wants to discuss a couple of the conditions with the Planning Commission to try to bring it into compliance or other alternative options to address the concerns by the city. And so just jumping into the standards. So the site currently exists and no significant changes have been proposed to the layout or to be constructed. The applicant plans to place the kiosks on the site, taking up a parking space on the property. This will have little to no impact on traffic ingress or egress and internal circulation. For the parking, the current building on site is about 2,000 square feet. It's a hair salon with 23 parking spots. The applicant would like to use 3 spots to support the new kiosk and the city's parking table. The city's parking table does not include a pet spa or even a barber shop or hair salon within our parking table. And so for the code states that for other uses not listed above, namely the table, the parking requirement shall be established by the Planning Commission based on a reasonable number of spaces for staff and customers and similar requirements of like businesses. So currently, the staff does not believe that the kiosk will cause any conflict with the current parking needs. There is only room for 1 pet at a time, and the current site has adequate parking for the current business. So I don't have any concerns about the kiosk being placed and what it will do to the parking on the site itself. So the next item is there's currently landscaping on the site. It doesn't currently meet our standard, but was, if you look at the original site plan, the landscaping was provided and installed as required. The applicant has asked that the Planning Commission consider approving the existing landscaping since they do not have a secondary water or irrigation system in that area, and the existing site layout was approved prior to the current standard. For building and site layout, the building is a prefabricated structure with aluminum siding on the outside. Along its frontage are glass doors and windows. The city engineer has reviewed the plan, and I will go to some of his comments here in a second. So the big issue that I think that we're going to run into, and that the agent would like to talk to the Planning Commission about, is that this building itself is prefabricated. The outside is aluminum, and then it has some windows and glass doors on the exterior. So our code currently, what you're looking at is, you have about on the main frontage of the building that is planned, or 2 sides are all aluminum siding. One side is majority of glass window, and then the main frontage, you have a mix of a glass door, a couple windows, utility door to access some of the plumbing and electronics within the spa. And so it actually doesn't have a lot of, it only has about 30 plus square feet of just facade surface that is not part of the doors themselves. So we have concern that the one side of the building has approximately 27% glass, and the rest is the aluminum siding, which by our code, 60% has to meet a primary material. However, that is not including the doors themselves, which make up a majority of the frontage or the facade of the building. When I reached out to them, the applicant indicated in regards to the design requested, we would be able to change the colors of the equipment door and add Fox bricks on the bottom of the door if necessary, or be willing to work with other suggestions that the Planning Commission may have. And they sent that to me on the 6th. So in conversation with the applicant, they've indicated they're willing to make modifications to the exterior and wanted to work with the planning commission to see how they could come into compliance. Then I took some pictures that are in the site plan. If you see the one side that's primary glass, that will meet our facade standard. The other side with the main entrance, that's maybe the side that's a little bit more of concern. But as you look at it, you can tell there's very little of it that's actually facade on the structure itself. The applicant also indicated to me that they'd be willing to have their initial plan was to have the main front face out to the chevron, which means they would have that the main door that would be facing to the east, and then you'd have the side that has kind of the AC unit that would be facing the other roadway. But if they rotated it and had the main door face out north, then the other side would face the main roadway, which would be compliant with which that side is compliant with our standard. So a couple other items for review is that the applicant will have to tie into water and sewer services. This has been reviewed by engineering, and the sewer special service district has reviewed their plans. Because of the minimal work that's required, they're not requiring construction drawings for these tie-ins, and have indicated that the applicant has indicated they're not entering into the street, but tying onto existing utility services there. The engineer our city engineer has reviewed it, and they had a couple of recommendations, including recommend that the parking spaces be restriped. If you go out to the current site, the parking lot the striping has faded from what was on the initial site plan. He also indicated their sample exhibit shows 2 bollards. However, they haven't shown any on this. The applicant has responded with some copies of the bollards and has indicated they're willing to do that. They've also indicated they're willing to do the cross hatch striping, also recommended by the engineer. The building official had talked to another city where one of these was built and kind of asked what they looked at, and had indicated that a few items, which the applicant actually sent me that paperwork this week, that is being sent to the building official for their review. But I believe that will be something that they can just resolve with the building permit, not necessarily during this process. So generally speaking, my staff's recommendation to the planning commission is to approve the final site plan with the following findings and conditions: that so the first finding is the building does not meet the design review requirements listed in this section. So either the planning commission can recommend that the council consider the current facade materials and approve it, but needs to make certain findings, or the applicant can just make changes to bring up this building, or the rotation of the building will likely resolve a lot of those issues as well. That we've also found the parking is adequate, that the additional pet spa will not negatively impact the site, that the location of the spa meets the setbacks, the building size and height meets zoning standards, and the current landscaping does not comply with those same standards. However, the site improvements were installed according to the original site plan, which was approved by the city. So a couple conditions the city could or planning commission could consider is landscaping, that all facades facing the street must contain 60% of primary materials. The parking lot should be restriped to match the proposed parking plan, and crosshatch striping should be placed on the south side of the spa structure, and no parking should be posted. And then several closely spaced bollards should be installed between the closest parking stalls and the spa structure. And the applicant must get a building permit before permanently placing the kiosk on the site. Are there any questions for me?
So I've got a couple.
Yeah.
First, the primary materials lists architectural insulated metal panels.
Yes.
Isn't aluminum siding metal panels?
Yeah, so that is a good question. Typically, when you're looking at the architectural insulated metal panels,
I mean, I'm sure this is insulated if it's got plumbing in it.
yes, it will be.
Especially with the doors closed.
Yeah. And then the next question is if they just rotate this 180 degrees, doesn't it fall into compliance?
Yeah, so if they did rotate 180 degrees, the side facing north would comply with the 60%.
And wouldn't the side that's facing east, because it would be the view that we're seeing now?
Yeah, so I think the question is based on the code, that doors are excluded from the calculation.
Okay.
And so you're looking at the 2 windows, which would be included, and then the siding all around the doors plus the top ribbon.
Okay.
And
So
so that,
those would have to be out of a primary material.
yes, at least 60%. I guess we can talk to the applicant. The code states that part of the primary building materials are insulated metal panels, but part of the secondary materials is non-insulated corrugated and ribbed metal. And so I think when I was looking at what those would typically be, typically just aluminum siding, I don't know, would fall under the category of insulated metal panels. However, if the panels are insulated, they could potentially be they could potentially qualify under
Yeah.
that.
I mean, my personal opinion, I think we're looking over but I know why the code was written and the intent of it, but this seems awfully mobile, like it's, I don't know. And Amy, maybe you have a stronger opinion about it, but I also feel like we're on something that's so small.
Well, to me, this isn't a building, it's a kiosk. And we don't have a code for a kiosk,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
It's almost like an
Sounds like a
like
legal
an
problem.
ADU or
Yeah.
not an ADU,
It's an auxiliary building.
an auxiliary building
Yeah.
on a commercial lot.
Yeah.
So what do we do when it was a snow cone shack? Do we do the same? Are those under the same?
I
Guidelines or not?
honestly don't
Grandfathered
know.
in.
I try to look it up because that was the question I had, because this
Yeah.
is obviously a little bit different than what a primary commercial building
Yeah,
would be.
I think the snow cone shack was probably considered more of like something that was mobile. It wasn't permanently affixed to the ground. It didn't have plumbing run to it like this is gonna have. So I think there was probably just a business license that was obtained and yeah.
Isn't there one by Triple Stop? Isn't there one of these kind of by Triple?
Yes.
Triple Stop, okay.
Mhm.
But it's kind of hidden between the car wash and it's kind of hidden, so you can't really,
Unless you come out of the driveway of Midland Pharmacy.
yes.
which-
You'll see it.
So
That's what I was thinking.
So I was wondering if somebody could speak to the picture that was sent to us of another one of these,
Should we invite Mr.
Test
Michael?
spas.
Yeah, so
So he
the
can
applicant or the agent is on Zoom.
Okay. Is it Mr. Michaelis? Are you here to represent? Do we still have somebody online, Robin?
So while we're working on that, what about turning this thing 90 degrees instead of 180?
you
Does
still
that-
end up with the current side that's facing east would be facing 30, what's the address?
775 or whatever that is?
And I think that's the major hiccup is that the facades that are facing the roads are the.
Have you got me there?
Okay, yes, Mr. Michaelis, do you mind just introducing yourself with your name and address? Have you been hearing some of our discussion?
Yes, I've heard it all, I believe, from just, I missed probably the first minute or two, but my name's John Michaelis. I'm, represent Bowser Bath of Utah and Vicky. And, All Paws Pet Wash, I'm a distributor for them in Colorado and Utah. And, thank you for your consideration of placing the pet wash, at Vicky's place. This would be our 4th one in the close surrounding area. And be glad to answer any questions, or I believe you were asking about the picture we sent of another unit. Is that the Mountain Town Pet Wash?
Yes, with that picture, I don't know how much you want to duplicate that, but that looks like that would solve most of the problems that we're talking about.
Yeah, I thought so too. we would prefer to leave the long side, the 12-foot long side where the entrance glass opening door is, the man door, facing the chevron, and then maybe get a mock-up where we wrap the equipment room door, which is just to the right of that, and then wrap all the way around on the side where the air conditioner is. And it would be a PVC graphic wrap. And we've done it in quite a few pet washes where we run into this and get it approved by you guys and go that route would be our number one choice. You know, if you guys would accept that.
I mean, I like the effort that puts in, but it kind of doesn't, I mean, it doesn't fulfill the requirement to its heart, but it does visually. And it just seems like we're requiring this for a kiosk that I don't know. My personal opinion is I feel it's fine the way it is. And
Thank you. Yeah, I like that too. But
well,
but
yeah, I mean, it's
yeah.
ultimately, if you wrapped it, it still doesn't fulfill the code.
No, it doesn't. No, it just we could.
We're requiring you to do something or asking you to do something that still doesn't fulfill the code.
Correct. Yeah,
So-
we're just trying to help and make it, you know, blend in and be aesthetic, you know, look a little better for Vicky's lot.
So,
But it currently, if I'm not mistaken, your building is white sided anyway, isn't it? The Vicky's Spa.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not like it's the red one that's in the brochure that's got all this red trim on it. It fits
Yes.
the structure that's currently there.
so Stephen, I guess my question is, in order for us to do anything with this, assuming of course that we're all kind of leaning the way it sounds like we're leaning, we need to make a recommendation to the city council.
Yeah, so based on what the code, if the planning commission finds that the current facades don't meet the 60% requirement, the planning commission can, upon a recommendation, or the city council may approve alternative materials based off the planning commission's recommendation. And so I do think, you know, there was a point brought up about what we consider the metal paneling. Like I said, typically insulated panels are a little bit different than just the siding.
Yeah. And the fact that they specifically called out architectural, I know what their intent is,
Yeah.
but I also see that there's some gray area there that it's not a far-fetched. It's not like this is a rail container that someone cut a bunch of holes in and didn't paint, which it probably is a rail container, but it's.
No, they're fabricated aluminum.
Yeah, but
They're
I
all-
mean, so
yeah.
it's not like someone just, you know, got a Connex and cut some holes in it and put
True.
a door.
Yeah.
So this has an air conditioner? Is that correct? Is that what I'm seeing on the back?
Yeah, yes, sir. It's air conditioned and it's heated also into
So-
the pet wash area. The one in Kaysville operated all through the real cold snap we had a couple of weeks ago with no problem. And actually the structure is all insulated aluminum panels except for the glass. I don't know if that clears anything up, but
I think
Yeah,
that,
Sounds like
I think that's the
insulation to
answer right
me.
there. I mean,
yeah.
So I guess the planning commission could find that the panels that are currently provided meet the insulated metal panels that,
would it then still have to go on to city council?
not if the finding is that it meets the primary materials.
Okay.
It only has to go to the planning city council if the findings is that the materials don't meet the primary, or the primary materials as defined, and then the planning committee or the city council is approving an exception.
So if I'm not mistaken, the major hang up with all of this is the exterior. Everything else is pretty much being resolved.
Correct.
Landscaping was taken care of on the initial, parking was taken care of on the initial for the building. It's just the exterior.
Now, I think the engineer wants them to restripe the parking spaces, put in more bollards and do cross hatching. next
Is
to it.
that something, Amy, that all of that Jeff just listed that needs to be in the motion?
Or can it just be a staff recommendation?
So those conditions are listed directly within the report.
Okay.
And there's no problem. We're fine with all of those. Those are real common. And we like the bollards and the striping's no problem. And there is an impact fee. It's a real low fee for the sewer district that I think it was $632. And those are all we'd be happy to do.
So do we want to do some architectural enhancements as far as just, you guys are good with it? Because it looks to me just kind of like an enclosed trailer from two sides, like just.
Yeah, but I mean, by definition, they're insulated metal panels. They're not the raised standing seam panels that it refers to in secondary. They're
And then we would have them adjust the 180 degrees? Are we,
I think if we feel like that this siding meets the primary, it doesn't need to
then it doesn't need to
shift,
change? Okay.
right? Because it fulfills 100% of the side is.
Okay, so have it sit as is, so no change in.
Yeah, I think it's up to them. I don't know if that changes the permit or anything if they end up rotating it, but I would assume the way that it is probably the best for what they're wanting to do anyway. The door facing the parking lot,
Sounds to me like if we feel that the metal insulated panels meet the 60% of the primary materials, then the conditions that we would be looking at as the conditions listed would be conditions 3, 4, and 5, restripe the parking lot, put in the bollards, et cetera.
Can I ask a question real quick? I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. The drawings I sent in to Stephen showed the long side with the glass man door. It's on the 12-foot side facing the chevron. That's where the customers will enter, and then we'll make sure that's ADA compliant entering through there. And that's what you guys are considering approving, correct?
yeah. So
Okay, good.
what we're
Okay.
saying is that as it currently sits, no matter the rotation, if we consider the siding that you have on that building as architectural insulated metal panels, it doesn't matter which way you rotate it. It meets all requirements.
Thank you. That's great. Yeah. Yeah, I think our best place to place it will be approximately 5 foot from both curbs to leave room for the ADA ramp and also for cleaning on the backside facing the side street. So, thank you.
Anything else?
I'm ready to make a motion. If
Okay.
you'd like.
I'm ready for one.
I make a motion that the planning commission grants final approval of the commercial site plan for Bowser Bath Pet Wash Kiosk, parcel number 0803200012 in West Haven. Subject to the following conditions, number 3, 4, and 5 in the staff report.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Hepworth and a second from Commissioner Galt. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Oppose? Okay, motion passes. Thank you for your time, Mr. Michaelis.
Yes, and thank you guys for the approval. And thank you especially to Stephen. He put in a lot of time. Thank you, Stephen and Amy and Vicky. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, moving on to agenda item number 6. We have a public hearing to consider a change to chapter 156 of the subdivision regulation. Turn time over to Stephen to introduce this item.
Yeah, I'll do a quick introduction to this.
Do we need to make a motion to enter public hearing?
Not yet.
Not yet?
Not
Okay.
yet.
My bad.
Right.
So that was when I take a meeting off.
Remind me, because I do forget.
I just want to make sure that we're doing it right. We don't got it
Yes.
backwards.
Yeah, I've done that.
Yeah, so I'll do a quick introduction. We talked a little bit about this during our workshop, but I'll kind of go over some of the main issues that we're considering. So West Haven Code currently requires that if a property owner would like to amend a subdivision plat, they have to get approval both from the Planning Commission and the City Council. However, since the new state law changed that we discussed earlier, the city has taken the position that that applied to amended plats, and so every amended plat that's came through over the last year or so has just received Planning Commission approval. Based off my discussions with Angie, or it's not, I'm sorry, with Amy, we were discussing this issue about whether or not, and about the importance of getting this changed. A couple of you emailed me about why we're doing this now, not with the rest of the subdivision code. And really, we feel like currently this is a issue that we feel like needs to be fixed immediately or as soon as possible. And essentially, we'll put a Band-Aid over this section of the code while we're fixing the rest of it. And so what the code change does is it eliminates the need for the city council. It takes out the city council from the code, and then puts the approval authority for amended plats directly to the Planning Commission. And then the proposed language also, it states, the added language states that all subdivision amendments shall comply with the provisions of this chapter, the underlying zoning standards, and the standards set within State Code 10-9A 608 and 10-9A 609, which as amended. So those sections in the state are in state law and particularly govern what is required on a preliminary or an amended plat. Amended plats have to contain certain notes to state that they're amended, that they reference back to the original plat. And so instead of incorporating all that language directly into our code, we're just referencing those standards that are in state law to ensure that applicants and staff know to look there when an amended plat comes through. So those are the proposed changes. It's a pretty simple change to the code. As mentioned, we'll probably do something a little bit more robust in the future, but this will fix the underlying problem that we're currently facing.
Okay, seems pretty straightforward. And we've already had a discussion in our work session. Anybody have any other comments? Questions?
I have a recommended correction.
I hope so.
Big surprise there. On the ordinance itself, ordinance number blank 2025, capitalize the S at the end of plats since the rest of everything is capitalized. Sorry, Stephen.
No, that's a good catch.
That's all I got.
Anything else?
Public hearing.
Oh, yeah, let's do that. Forget. Thanks. See, I needed your,
It's because I jumped the gun.
I know.
Because I
Okay.
jumped the gun.
Yeah, so I'll have a motion if we want to enter public hearing.
I'll make a motion. We enter public hearing to consider a change to Chapter 156 of the subdivision regulation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Reyna and a second by Commissioner Reed to enter public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, now we are officially in public hearing. So anyone in our audience that would like to make a comment, please step up to the microphone. Is there anyone online, Robin? This is a hot topic, you know. Sometimes we need the sheriff in attendance, but not for this one, I guess. Those were the good old days.
You're looking at me.
It wasn't you, George. George, you just kept us on our toes.
You were there.
You
But
could have seen some of the fireworks, but yeah, things are just a little quiet. Hey, with that, I don't see that we have anyone. in
I'll
the
make a
public.
motion to leave public hearing.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Simpson and a second by Commissioner Reed to leave public hearing. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we are now officially out of public hearing. Does anyone have any other comments or questions? I think we've discussed it
I think it's
very,
good
very
housekeeping.
clear. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so too. I think so too. So with that, I'm ready for a motion. Since we have no further discussion, so a motion to change chapter 156.
Or There'd be a
Yeah, do we
motion to
adopt it or
adopt,
change?
right?
Let's recommend it.
Recommend,
Oh,
Recommend to city
recommend to
council?
adopt?
recommend to city council.
Okay. I make a motion to recommend to city council ordinance number blank. Or is it?
We- Typically, the city council adopts the ordinance number.
Okay. So I recommend to city council, the ordinance to, change chapter 156 of the subdivision regulation.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Commissioner Hepworth to change and a second by Commissioner Reed. All those in favor?
Bye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, and then agenda item number 8, training. I assume this is Stephen.
Oh, yes.
Yes?
Yeah, so let me pull those up. I almost forgot about that. The state has required that that everyone that's involved in land use approvals or applications has to watch a couple of stormwater videos. And so there's 2 videos that we'll watch. Let's see. Do you have access to the S Drive? Okay, I can pull them up real quick, and maybe I'll just pull the TV over while we're.
Send them to us and we promised to watch.
So, because of the state.
Oh, wait, she does.
Oh, perfect. Because of the state code, we recently were audited for stormwater, and we have to come up with a compliance plan. And we felt, as I talked to our stormwater manager and engineer, they felt like it would be better if we had them on an agenda, so we had evidence that we showed them to the planning commission.
Is that why we're all here in attendance in person?
It's under the S Drive, under stormwater training.
Because we're notorious liars.
I wanted.
It's there.
Oh, no, I answered every question truthfully on my post test.
Oh my God.
So it's
did anybody fail the
stormwater, the
test?
basics, and illicit discharge are the 2 videos.
How long are these videos?
They're each about 4 minutes.
Okay.
All right. We just need some expectations here because we have short attention
8
spans.
minutes to do our part, all right? If she can.
If she can
pull
find
up.
them,
Yeah.
I move
If not, I
to move them to the next agenda.
You got a bunch of stuff going.
I do. It's just,
Okay, off the record, I wanted to, well, I guess we're on the record. Maybe I'll wait. At the Bowser Wash, I need a place to take my father-in-law to shower because he's living with us and we don't have a shower. And honestly was considering something. And I said, we could take him to like a.
I do think we need a code for kiosks, but
Like, what are
Yeah,
different people
I-
from Washington?
snow cone joints and all that.
I think back when
started
we had
talking
two
about
dogs,
that to my husband,
I
I'm
would
like,
have gone
"We
for that
should have
Bowser
this
bath as an
We
AD.
just had a lot.
Yeah, right, just on your property.
Yeah.
It's like, how do I get one of those for my house?
is he in a wheelchair?
He broke his hip and they can't operate, so he's in a wheelchair, but he can walk with a walker. We just have a half bath, we just have a half bath, and he can't put weight on it, so he's, darn it, broke his hip, so, it's been our elder care.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, you've had a tough time.
It's been a year, but his 3-legged cat is not.
Share.
It's just like my husband had surgery.
Things like that.
And this is kind of my life, kind of like me coming like, I'm just like trying to.
Did I pass it?
Okay,
Ah, right.
everything's gonna.
Sometimes. I
Hey.
feel like that.
Look at that.
It's like.
And stopping water pollution? Quiz question. What is one of the most cost-efficient practices for
1995.
finding and stopping water pollution? Here are several hints. Number 1, this practice has been largely overlooked in the past by local governments. Number 2, it can help meet permit and regulatory requirements. And 3, it can improve stream health by achieving significant reductions in pollutants. The answer? IDDE, illicit discharge detection and elimination. So what exactly is IDDE? If you walk alongside almost any stream in an urban or suburban area, you will see the openings of many pipes leading directly into the stream. These pipes carry runoff from a multitude of land uses, such as streets, parking lots, and rooftops. This stormwater runoff enters the stream only during or after a rainstorm. However, some of these pipes carry flow to the streams at times other than rainstorms. Unnoticed and undetected, some of these pipes carry sewage, detergents, bacteria-laden water, and even toxic chemicals, quietly polluting our streams, rivers, and lakes. These flows are known as illicit discharges, and IDDE is the process of finding and fixing these hidden culprits. It's like being a stream detective. Recent analysis conducted by the Center for Watershed Protection for one local government attributed nearly 100% of nutrient pollution in the local watershed to outfalls with potential illicit discharge problems. Samples exceeded certain indicator thresholds, which means they're much more likely to contribute unacceptable levels of potentially harmful bacteria and pathogens. So how do we go about finding and fixing these hidden stream culprits? It begins with walking local waterways and looking for pipes coming out of the banks. This is important because you may find pipes that are not on existing maps or have gone undetected. This is done during a dry period so that all flowing outfalls can be detected. Once at the outfall, conduct a quick assessment to determine if an illicit discharge may be present. Look for algae or benthic growth in the bottom of the pipe, perhaps sewage fungus, poor pool quality, corrosion of the pipe, odor, the presence of floatables, or discoloration of the water. Since illicit discharges may be hard to detect, a series of water quality tests should be performed to determine the source of the water and get quantitative discharge measurements. Ammonia is the primary indicator of the presence of an illicit discharge. High levels likely indicate a wastewater or sewage discharge, and while some analyses can be done in the field, tests for potassium, fluoride, nitrogen, phosphorus, or bacteria are best conducted back at the lab. If detected and confirmed, a storm drainage area investigation is conducted to determine the source of the problem. This involves moving up the pipe or up the drainage system and testing the water at outfalls or manholes along the way until the source is isolated. So how do we eliminate these culprits? Because many sources of pollution are hidden from everyday view, eliminating illicit discharges involves working with businesses, homeowners, local governments, utility departments, and watershed groups to restore and protect clean waterways. It can involve redirecting pipes and drains to the sanitary sewer, plugging floor drains, fixing sewer line leaks, and other practices. It is also important to quantify and accurately report on the problems fixed and the pollutants eliminated. This shows that these efforts are effective and feasible to implement. It gives the local program due credit for permit and compliance programs and communicates that water quality is being improved.
Okay, and then we just have one more, which is the
I
basics.
just didn't know illicit discharge was a thing, and now I know.
Stormwater management thing, such a big deal. So what happens is when it rains, here's my rain cloud. In a perfect world, the stormwater runs over all these surfaces, it collects and conveys, and it starts to concentrate and form little streams and flow downstream into our water bodies. But in reality, we know that things are not so clean. So stormwater has this huge potential to pick up these pollutants and carry them downstream. So for example, on construction sites, which is mainly where we work, we see a lot of things like sediment, which is the #1 source of stormwater pollution. We see things like concrete waste, which can increase the pH of your stormwater and water as it leaves the site. We see things like other chemicals, battery acids, paint, miscellaneous chemicals. We see oil and grease, leaking equipment, somebody backed into a fuel container. All kinds of potential chemicals that are exposed while you're doing construction. And so when it rains and if this site doesn't have adequate protection measures, the stormwater, it cleans off the site, that's for sure, but it takes all of these chemicals and moves them downstream and concentrates these chemicals downstream in our water bodies, which can be very toxic for our wildlife. It's not good for our own water quality, makes the water much more difficult to treat and to clean. And it can also impact and impound our water bodies by making them shallower, and we have to go and dredge them out, which can be very expensive. So there are various consequences when we improperly manage our stormwater runoff. So runoff is any stormwater that enters your site, concentrates and collects, and leaves the site. So if your site doesn't allow that water to soak back up into the ground, it creates runoff, and that runoff has the potential to carry all those pollutants that are exposed on your site and to bring them downstream, which, while it's not good for our wildlife, it's also potential for you to get fined.
Okay. So the last thing that we need is I have forms that you just need to print your name and sign it. Just take one down. I have some pens.
I'm not signing.
I would say I already marked the ones that we watched. And thank you. Our stormwater manager will be very happy about this. So.
Who is our
Like,
from?
step
Thank you,
PP or
Stephen.
whatever, That's what that's,
Mhm.
when you see those signs that say that.
Yeah.
Like, that's not.
Yeah. I say the state is going through and auditing different cities. And with that, they're requiring that cities do a couple things as part of that audit. And this was one of the steps. We recently were audited, and this was one of the steps that they wanted us to do, is show anybody who was involved with land use or development these 2 videos. So
Please pass your papers forward.
You're so good at that.
Sitting here.
Would you come teach?
I always.
So when
pass
they say like concrete
I always
clean out,
took
you
the
see all
back
those
row.
things. That's all part of
Unless I
that.
got in
Yep.
trouble.
And you went to the front.
Oh, I was waiting for the rest of it.
He's not used to sitting in the middle. Gotta pass from the back.
I'm sorry, but they lost all credibility when they put soy sauce on. They
That's
couldn't-
It's a pretty good visual, though. I mean, you know, it all goes downstream.
Yes, no, I agree. I understand, but
Yeah.
pick a different container.
Look at the
Kingdom
stingray.
and soy sauce just doesn't.
Yeah,
I think we're good.
that's Stephen.
How about your pen? Please.
Right.
We have the remedial group over there, apparently.
Well, we're working, well, we'll give it this just a minute. Now, before we officially complete our meeting tonight. Let's go ahead. Okay, I'm ready for a motion. So agenda
Move to
item number-
adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion to adjourn by Commissioner Reed, a second by Commissioner Seaver. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any-
Aye.
We are.